Welcome to Football's Golden Oldies from the Toll House in Lancaster. This is part one of the great Stan Cullis lecture. And before we start, can I ask you to subscribe and hit the notification button. I want to tell you the story of the passionate Puritan. You can see him. You can see the stadium, which is very, very impressive indeed. Terrace songs are an important part of soccer history. Most people wouldn't associate a classical composer with rowdy soccer fans hurling abuse at rivals from the terraces. But Sir Edward Elgar, famous for Land of Hope and Glory, was the brains behind the world's first ever football chant, penned for Wolverhampton Wanderers, the club he supported. He would cycle from Malvern in Worcester to Wolverhampton, 40 miles, with Dora Penny, daughter of the rector of St Peter's Church, in the 1890s. Entitled, He Banged the Leather for Goal, not a particular brilliant title, inspired by rugged striker Billy Malpass. It was sung by opera singer Rita Cullis, who was the niece of Stan in 2010. A man with backbone, integrity and a belief in doing what is right. He was called the Winston Churchill of English football. John Arlott called him the passionate Puritan. He never swore once in his life. The worst words to pass his lips when rage consumed him were flipping or flopping. He was a devout Christian. And that reminds me of the great Sir Tom Finney, who never swore in his life. He would use fizzing. Ferenc Puskas called him the most classical centre-half in the world. He became captain of England at the age of 22. He kept a little private book on every centre-forward he faced. This is a remarkable story of one of England's finest players, as well as one of its greatest managers, a man whose fearsome reputation and leadership skills were allied to the sharpest of football brains. But who was Stan Cullis really? Blue plaque for Cullis at Cambridge Road School. Wolves star player John Richards on the left and current board member John Goff attended, as well as Stan's son, the Reverend Andrew Cullis. Stan was always very proud of his son. Little could Stan Cullis or Joe Mercer know, when they attended Cambridge Road School together, that they would both go on to reach the very pinnacle of football, both on and off the field. Stan was chosen to represent Ellesmere Port Boys against Chester in 1929, and professional scouts were there in force, but Stan's future had already been mapped out by his father, a passionate Wolves fan, so no scout was allowed to talk to Stan. Stan's father said, "When I consider my boy good enough, he will join Wolverhampton Wanderers." So why were ardent Wolves fans living in Ellesmere Port? The Wolverhampton Corrugated Iron Company. As part of the war effort, the Iron Company had been relocated to Ellesmere Port from Wolverhampton, and it still operates in 2023. He did in fact have a trial for Bolton Wanderers, but only as a practice, and in 1934, aged 18, it was decided he was good enough by the Martinet of Molyneux, the renowned Major Frank Buckley. During his first year playing for Wolves 18, Buckley took him aside and said, "Son, if you listen and do as you're told, I will make you captain of Wolves one day." Within a year, he had made his first team debut. In 2 years, he was a regular, and in the third, he was made captain. Cullis would later say that Buckley taught him to handle footballers with a rigorous authority and with far more iron than velvet in your touch. Major Frank Buckley was Stan's mentor. Stan led Wolves as they became the Nearly team in the years leading up to World War II. Runners-up in the First Division in season 1937-38 to Arsenal and in 38-39 to Everton, they completed an unenviable double in the second season with defeat in the FA Cup final by 4-1 to Portsmouth when they were odds-on favourites, which was also known as the Monkey Gland final. Stan said about Buckley, "He spent many hours drilling me in the precious art of captaincy, telling me in no ambiguous terms that I was the boss on the field, and I could not ask for a better instructor than the Major, who laid the foundations of the modern Wolves during his 16 years at Molineux." Yeah, Major Frank Buckley was a fantastic man, and he took the parade ground rules onto the football field. The Monkey Gland mystery. Monkey gland juice was a briefly fashionable stimulant in the pre-war game, probably the first performing enhancing substance known to professional football, although amphetamine abuse was widely common at the time too. The juice was extracted from the glands and testicles of monkeys, apes and other primates, and in the case of wolves, their weekly dose was injected and the doses were increased in the run-up to the final. As for Portsmouth, their team maintained a cultured dignity, sipping the monkey juice from cocktail glasses. The main supplier was a mysterious Scottish chemist called Menzies Sharp, who had been a student of the notorious Russian scientist Abramovich Voronov. Apparently a photograph has survived of the Portsmouth team in full kit, swigging the monkey glands as their trainer stands by with a half-full bottle of the elixir, but I hadn't any success in finding that photograph. When the leagues reformed in 1945, the NHS was born and new food standards came into effect, and the practice faded into history. The monkey gland cocktail can be bought today, and ingredients are a measure of dry gin, fresh orange juice, grenadine, sugar, 2 or 3 dashes of absinthe. Shake all with ice until cold. Serve in a chilled cocktail glass with no garnish. Please let me know how you go on in a posh cocktail bar when you walk up to the bar and say, "A monkey gland please, and keep them coming." One man did what was right. Early in the 1937-38 season, Cullis was called up by England for the first time and made his debut in a 5-1 win over Ireland in Belfast. In May 1938, during an end-of-season tour, England were in Berlin to play Germany. Sir Neville Henderson, British ambassador to Germany, informed the FA secretary, Stanley Rouse, that the England players would be expected to give the Nazi salute before the game. It was explained to the team that this was an order, to which Stan Cullis replied with a terse, "You can count me out." Cullis was dropped from the team, but was back in before the tour ended. But this is an example of a man doing what was right and refusing to go along with orders from above, who were only interested in politics and their own ambitions. Stan could live with his conscience, but many of his teammates, like Stan Matthews and Eddie Hapgood, regretted their actions for the rest of their lives. And you can see in the photograph the disgraceful players giving the Nazi salute. Captain of his country at 22 years of age. Cullis was made captain of his country at 22 years old for the game against Romania in Bucharest in May 1939 and can be seen leading his team onto the field. The team that day included his old friend Joe Mercer and Tommy Lawton, who said later, "Stan Cullis was the best centre-half I ever played against. He had the resilience of a concrete wall, the speed of a whippet and the footwork of a ballet dancer." I think that tells you all you need to know about Stan Cullis on the football field. Like his friend Joe Mercer, Cullis had his best footballing years taken away by World War II and served his time as a physical training instructor, as well as playing for Wolves, guesting for Aldershot, Gillingham, Fulham and Liverpool, as well as 20 wartime internationals for his country. In one game he was hit in the face so hard by the ball that he spent 5 days in hospital with severe concussion. And don't forget, that ball in those days, especially if it was wet, it was like being hit with a cannonball. It's not like the beach balls that they play with nowadays. He was warned that by continuing to play, he was risking his life and told to keep away from the game for at least 6 months. Two photos spanning 5 years. England in Milan for international game in May 1939. And you can see Stan at the front with a checkered jacket, which I'm not sure is a height of fashion. And the player on the right is Tommy Lawton. England versus Scotland at Hampden 1944 with sitting Jimmy Hagan from the right, Frank Swift, Stan Cullis sat down and Sergeant Rach Carter. Wartime memories. Stan, you can see on the left, in full military gear, and then in a wartime international introducing Clement Attlee to Jimmy Hagan alongside Stan Matthews, Rach Carter and George Hardwick, and a proud Stan with King George VI in uniform meeting the team. Finally, the end of the road for Stan, who would not cheat to win a championship. After 6.5 years in the army, including time spent in Italy, Cullis returned to civilian life and carried on playing, but only for one more season. In the final game of the 1946-47 season, Wolves played Liverpool, needing a draw with the First Division title on the line. The lower photograph shows Albert Stubbins scoring the second goal against Wolves, beating Bert Williams. That would win them the championship. Stan Cullis and Billy Wright had chased Albert from the halfway line, and Stubbins remembers hearing Stan and Billy Wright close behind him, panting and trying to catch him. Stan said later, "A lot of people have since asked me why I didn't bring him down or pull Albert back by his shirt. And I could have done, quite easily, but I didn't believe in winning something by cheating. And I would have gone down in history, in the history of football, as the man who decided the destiny of a championship with a professional foul." Yeah, Stan Cullis was above all that sort of thing. With doctors continuing to warn him that even heading the ball could cause serious injury or death, Stan agreed that the risk was too great and hung up his boots aged just 31. It was terrible that he had to pack up playing then. He could have gone on for 5, 6, 7 years. After retiring, Cullis took up the role of assistant manager at Molineux to Ted Vizard, and after serving a year's apprenticeship under the Welshman, Stan took over as manager in June 1948 at 32 years of age. Stan's new regime brings a trophy after 41 years. Cullis, a tough disciplinarian who demanded and gave 100%, immediately installed a new training regime and insisted that his side play a high-tempo game that would pressure opponents into mistakes. Each player was given individual fitness targets, and his methods had an immediate impact. At the end of his first season in charge, 1949, Cullis led his players out at Wembley for the FA Cup final against Leicester City. Wolves ran out 3-1 winners with goals from Jesse Pye and Sammy Smith to secure the club's first major trophy since 1908. And you can see Stan shaking hands with the Duke of Edinburgh, and in the background the man from the 1850s, Joe Richard. FA Cup winners. You can see the team there, proud. On the back row you've got Crook, Pritchard, the great Bert Williams in goal, Shorthouse, Springthorpe, front row, Johnny Hancock's, who looks like he's got a pair of cricket pads down his socks, Sammy Smythe, Stan Cullis, Billy Wright, Jesse Pye, Dunn and Mullen. And Mullen and Hancock's were the wingers who created havoc in opposition penalty areas. Charles Reap, the first football analyst. In August 1951, Charles Reap was posted to RAF Bridgenorth and soon contacted the local side, Wolverhampton Wanderers. Cullis had won Wolves the 1949 FA Cup and was already on the way to great things at Molineux, but soon after meeting Reap, he began working with his wingers on the loose balls in the goalmouth system. Wolves scored 25 goals in their next 7 matches. Reap was brought in closer for the 52-53 season, but still recalled being regarded with uneasy suspicion by the directors, who understood absolutely nothing of the fundamental principles that were bringing the teams great success. With Reap and Cullis working in the same direction at least, by early November, Wolves were top of the First Division, following a 7-3 win at home against Man City, while a few games earlier they had beaten Manchester United 6-2. What Reap offered was the analogue equivalent of the data obtained by top-class teams today. At the time, it was just as cutting edge. The English FA dismissed him as an eccentric chap, which is not surprising because they were all amateurs. That season, Wolves faded to finish third, but the following year they came back stronger, and when they beat Tottenham 2-0 in April '54 and were crowned league champions, Reap felt vindicated. The city of Wolverhampton was ecstatic, and Cullis celebrated by putting the kettle on. At a civic banquet in honour of the team, the great manager publicly thanked his analyst Charles Reap. Wolves were one of the teams of the decade and would be champions again in 1958 and 1959. Because in the 1950s, Wolverhampton Wanderers won the title 3 times, as did Manchester United. From his first league experience with Brentford to Wolves winning the title 3 years later, Reap had made unbelievable progress in the fields of football data and analysis, but this was to be the high point. Reap left Wolves for Sheffield Wednesday in 1959, as he had never been formally employed at Molineux, and the job at Hillsborough offered security and more money. He helped the Owls win promotion to the First Division as champions in 1956, scoring over 100 goals before leaving 2 seasons later, when the manager who brought him in, Eric Taylor, was sacked. His journey continued at several other English clubs, including Coventry, Torquay and Plymouth in the 60s and 70s, then Stoke City, Chesterfield and Cambridge in the 1980s, but never again would he find a place at the top of the English game. Consequently, his reputation suffered. Maybe the reason was the players and managers were not good enough to take advantage of the data he provided. Stan Cullis took Wolves to the summit of football. Wolves finished runners-up to Portsmouth in the 1949-50 title race and then had a couple of disappointing campaigns as Cullis set about creating his own team. Once he had got the right lineup together, Wolves dominated English football along with Manchester United. They captured the title for the first time in 53-54, would win it twice more, as well as a second FA Cup in the next 8 seasons, during which they would never finish lower than 6th. The photo shows Stan devising tactics like Billy Suddle 70 years earlier at Preston North End, the Invincibles. Getting the right lineup. Stan noted that Arsenal in 1947-48 had established a new record low figure for the First Division when they conceded 32 in 42 games playing defensive football. World War II had left a huge void in the game. Young players had not been scouted for obvious reasons, and the veteran players from the 1930s had aged by at least 6 years. It was easy to justify defensive play with the attitude that if the opposition don't score, then we're guaranteed a point from every match. Very negative thinking. Although attendances rose to new heights immediately after the war, the public quickly lost interest in the spread of negative football, and soon gates began to drop sharply. Newspapers called them the missing millions, and in letters to the press and to individual clubs, the message was clear that fans wanted to see more goals and more characters to entertain them. After all, football is in the entertainment business. What did Stan decide? Managers couldn't conjure up great individuals out of a hat, and no system of training or coaching can turn an honest player into a master craftsman. Stan said that managers could introduce tactical plans likely to produce more goals, and this change in thinking caused by public opinion was responsible for the great improvement in the standard of entertainment provided by Football League clubs in the 1950s. From about 1950 until 53, our fortunes were at their lowest ebb. The football provided by many clubs was poor, and the paucity of our resources was reflected in England's team. Spurs under Arthur Rowe, Manchester United under Murphy and Busby, and Wolves under Stan Cullis all devised completely different tactics and clinched 7 championships in the decade. Spurs played a system that was called push and run, that required an unbelievably high level of fitness and stamina. Wolves devised a system that was unkindly called kick and rush. It was nothing of the sort. Man United played a system that in my eyes could be called total football. All different, but devised by coaches who had intellects that surpassed the run-of-the-mill manager. From about 1950 until 1953, our fortunes were at the lowest ebb. The football provided by many clubs was poor, and the paucity of our resources was reflected in England's team. In 1950, for example, England lost to the USA, of all teams in the World Cup in Rio de Janeiro, and then we were defeated by Era 2-0 at Goodison Park before the Hungarians arrived on our shores to dispel any assumptions that we were a leading football nation. A great Hungarian myth in Stan's own words. The legend grew that Hungary played football on the floor and used mainly short passes, but the actual facts and figures drawn from the game analysis showed a very different situation. Puskás and his team hit a high number of long passes, and many of them were in the air. The actual figure of long passes was as many as 94. Most of them played in the first hour of the match, with more than 60 played in the air. The general impression was that Hungary's 6 goals were scored by means of clever movements that contained many short passes, but only one of Hungary's goals came from a move which started in their half of the field. As I sat in the stand at Wembley with Wolves trainer Joe Gardner, we both thought that the play of the Hungarians confirmed most of the ideas we were trying to use at Molineux, going for goal in a direct, incisive fashion which contained hardly any frills, although our players were masters of ball control. Stan was really impressed by the 2 wingers, Budaj and Shebo, and of course that's what he used his wingers for. 2 players he considered essential to successful football, and he recreated them at Molineux. He was also mightily impressed with goalkeeper Grosic, who often acted as a second centre-half, preferring to kick a long ball well out of his own half, acting on the instructions from the team's coach. And Stan would use Bert Williams in a similar fashion. Bert was the fastest man on the Wolves staff, running 100 yards in 10.4 seconds, and never convinced Stan about throwing the ball out to a fullback when he got his fingers burned when he attempted it. Yeah, when Bert Williams came back from an international, he told me that when he played for England, he would pass the ball out to his right fullbacks, Alf Ramsey, who would start a move. So he was continually asking Stan if he could do that at Wolves, and Stan wouldn't have any of it. But anyway, he finally wilted, and he said, "Oh, right, go on then." And so the first time Bert Williams passed the ball out to his fullback, Nat Lofthouse intercepted it and cracked. Wolves were 1 down. So then it was a case of Stan Cullis saying it was flipping and flopping, and that never happened again. That is the end of part 1 of Stan Cullis.